Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, whatever part of the world you are tuned in from. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth. June 29th, 2021. This is episode 115. As always, today's episode is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory taste at game time, there's only one G Vegas available at www.gvegas.webs.com. I love a good buffalo sauce, and what I like even more is comedy. And if you were a young comedian and you sat down and you pulled out a piece of paper and tried to make a bucket list of everything you'd want to accomplish as a comedian, the guest I have on today has accomplished most of it. What a legendary career. Thank you for joining us, Boston comedian Jimmy Tingle. Welcome to the show.
Dennis Wirth, man, you are good. I like that introduction, brother. You are smooth like the silk. You are smooth like that barbecue sauce.
Someday I'll be smooth like you, I hope. But we got to start somewhere. Let's take it back to the beginning. When you were a young kid, what made you want to be a comedian? What inspired you to want to do the business?
You know, I just started doing open mic nights back in 79 and 1980. I did gong shows, street performing, open mic nights. I just had things that I wanted to talk about early on. I did song parodies. It came down to expression. I wasn't interested in show business so much as I was interested in just saying what I had been thinking about or observing in the world, and that's really what got me into it.
It turned into an art form for you then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I happened to grow up in Cambridge, and I happened to go to high school with Lenny Clark. He was a year ahead of me, and the Ding Ho Comedy Club opened up literally 2 blocks from where my mom's house was in Cambridge. And so it was in Inman Square, Cambridge, and we used to go there. The first Legal Seafood. You're familiar with Legal Seafood, Dennis?
Yeah, the commercials, the same all the time, yeah.
Yeah, it was, Legal Seafood, the first one opened up in Inman Square, Cambridge. And it was just a very working class, neighborhood type of place. Inman Square was in between Harvard and MIT in the city of Cambridge. So it was about a mile from each one. But this is a largely Italian, Portuguese neighborhood. And my mother grew up in that area and we lived right down the street. So anyway, when Lenny started doing these open mic nights in 1979 and 1980, I ran into him on the street. I said, Lenny, could I try doing some stand-up comedy? He goes, sure, come on down. You just sign up. All you had to do, Dennis, is go into the club at 7 o'clock, put your name on a list. They would take the list in the back room. They would arrange it, to kind of have some balance to the show. And then they would just put on, 25, 30 people a night. And Lenny was the host. It would start at 7 and go to like 1, 2 in the morning.
Now, when I interviewed Lenny, I asked him this. He said you guys did it for like $20 or something. Did you have any idea you guys were going to go on to be the legends, or were you just doing it to have fun and it happened?
I had no idea about anything professional. I was completely driven. I was driven by content. And then when I said, when it became obvious that they were hiring people to do it on weekends at the clubs, and then it became, wow, I could actually make $20 or $30 or $40 or whatever it was, So yeah, that became an incentive later on. But initially it was really just about getting up there, the thrill of doing it, trying to create something. And it was a real camaraderie. I don't know if you ever played sports, but it's sort of like being on you're a freshman in high school and then, you want to play eventually. Yeah, you want to make the team and you're on the JV team, the freshman team, you want to make the varsity. And so kind of like getting paid work was sort of like making the varsity, as young adults. And we were all in our early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, basically. Bob Seibel, are you familiar with Bob?
I love Bob. Rest in peace. He was a
Rest in peace. If you have his, by the way, I want to talk to you about Bob later if you have his wife's contact information.
I do. Yeah, he was on the TV show, an old TV show I had Bob on. Yeah.
Okay, great. I love Bob too. But Bob Seibel was the oldest comic there, and he was probably like 32. And he was like the old man and he didn't drink. And that was like really unbelievable for us because we were all, pretty much hitting it hard at that time. Right. Alcohol and the beer it was basically complimentary
comedy, right?
at the Ding Ho. And so, and Bob Seibel was sober. So anyway, he was like 32, maybe 33 years old. And we're like, oh my God, Seibel's like middle age and he's down here and he's the craziest one and he's got the most energy. And he always closed Lenny's show. And he was so funny. He'd be on at 1, 2 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning. He'd be singing his Greek songs. He'd be talking about Lynn. I'm from Lynn.
He was a wild man. He was Bobby.
The city of sin. He goes, McDonald's closed in Lynn. That's how fucked up Lynn is. And he would just go on and he would have the whole place in stitches late at night. And he was the only sober one there too. So it was like making the varsity when you started to get paid.
Right. So were you there? I know every young comic started that, the Tonight Show, one of the producers, he was out here looking at colleges or something for his kids. And they put the special night together where we know Stephen Wright, he got to go on to the Tonight Show. But were you there for that night when they came out to see the Boston comics?
I was the daytime bartender. I got a job there and I was the daytime bartender and took the list for reservations and all that during the day. So I gave Jim McCauley directions from Emerson College how to get to the Ding Ho. Okay. And what Barry Cremens did, he put the list together. But what he did is, because it was like a Thursday night or a Wednesday night, what he did is, there were a few gigs around New England on that night that the Ding Ho guys were doing. For example, there was a gig down in New Haven, Connecticut. And I remember Barry and I forget who else that night was supposed, maybe DJ Hazard, maybe Lenny, was supposed to do the New Haven, Connecticut gig right next to Yale. And because McCauley was coming in that night, I got to do that gig. So I wasn't there the night that they did the Tonight Show audition. I got farmed out to take the place of the guys who were doing the audition.
Right. They were going to be on, so you had to
So I got $100 out of it. But that's where I was at my career, that I was starting to get paid work. I think it was 82, 83, something like that. I was starting to get paid work after a couple of years. Yeah.
Well, I had Bill Campbell on, and he said most of you didn't even take it serious. He said, I had to work that night. I couldn't be there. It wasn't like today where you'd be dying to do the spot, but I guess it was a casual thing or something.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. Barry put it together, and McCauley had read an article about us in a newspaper, that in the LA Times, there was an article about these Boston comics. Yeah.
Huh. So Barry Cremens, he was the guy who ran the club, obviously. That's who we're talking about, Barry. For anybody who's listening, I'd say go to YouTube and watch the documentary When Stand Up Stood Out. Very great documentary in the days of the Ding Ho. But you actually put together, I believe, last year, a 40-year anniversary of the Ding Ho to raise money for Barry's wife, correct?
Yes.
And I mean, there were comics, Lenny Clark, Stephen Wright, Dennis Leary, Bobcat Goldthwait, Paula Stone, yourself were hosting.
Paula Stone, yep.
Right. So you're going to be doing another replay this year. So tell us about that. How did last year's go and what do you got planned for this year?
Last year's went great. We couldn't believe it. We had 30 comedians, mostly all over 60 years old, on Zoom. And it was in July 3rd. And it was just a hilarious situation trying to get 30, 60-year-olds plus to figure out Zoom. Don Gavin, Brian Kiley, everybody. And Zoom wasn't even as popular as it is now.
That's
so
a comedy
now,
routine right there.
Yeah, exactly. And it was hilarious. And we had to rehearse. We rehearsed like we had three or 4 hour rehearsals leading up to it. And Lenny Clark said, if I rehearsed this much for my own television show, I'd still be on the air. He said,
oh boy.
Yeah, but we had a blast doing it. And we raised a lot of money for Helen. We raised like $37,000, I think it was, for her.
That's great. Wow.
Yeah, it was fabulous. And this year, because now everything's opening up in most places, most of the comics are all working again, rather than try to get everybody back live on Zoom to do it or in person. We're going to rerun last year. So there's a lot of people that haven't seen it. And it's a real history of the scene. And it's funny, but it's also interviews with people about that time, about Barry Cremens, about comedy. and their fond memories of Barry, their funny memories of him, and also their stand-up comedy from the various shows that they've done over the years, whether it's Letterman or Conan or the 20th anniversary that we did at the Somerville Theater in 1999, which Barry and I produced when I was on 60 Minutes actually at the time. But Barry and I produced that, and so we have clips of that as well.
All right, so we get documentary and comedy. This is happening July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd on Zoom from 7 to 11 p.m. You can buy one ticket, and that gets you access to all 3 nights, correct?
That's right. One ticket, you buy all 3 nights, and each night is broken up into 2 acts. So you can watch the first act for 1 hour and 45 minutes, and then we take an intermission and we watch the second act. But if you don't want to watch the second act on the first, you can come back and watch it on the second. So that's how I mean, you can watch it, any of the 3 nights, and
Okay,
you can
so
come
once
in
you
and
got
out
the
as
ticket,
you
you're
need.
going to access, and
Yeah.
tickets are available where? On your website, jimmytingle.com?
JimmyTingle.com is where you can get tickets. Yes, sir.
All right, so that's JimmyTingle.com. That's where you can get tickets to the Humor for Humanity 40th anniversary replay last year, where you're going to get all the legends. And so what made you want to put this together originally? What was the big idea behind the thing?
Well, the big idea was that it coincided, it was the 40th anniversary of the Dingo. It coincided with Barry's passing, and it coincided with Helen's need for medical expenses, his wife, Helen. So we had been all kind of pitching in as we went along the last couple of years. Different people said, hey, let's do a fundraiser. And we were going to try to do it live at the Somerville Theater, but then the pandemic hit. So I said, something, I'm doing things on Zoom all the time. Let's see if we can try to do it on Zoom. And will people come? And people came, and they paid.
Did you feel an obligation to do this because of all Barry did to help you guys back in the day?
Absolutely, yeah. Everybody felt an obligation. Stephen Wright, Dennis Leary, Paula, everybody, Lenny Clark, everybody felt an obligation and a real desire to do something. For me, and for most of the comics, when you're using your work for purposes beyond just the entertainment value, it tends to mean a lot. And it tends to mean more sometimes when you're doing it for those purposes. So that's what this whole thing was about. And people loved Barry. He was a gruff guy. He was a brilliant guy. I don't know if you ever met him, Dennis.
I didn't meet him. I saw, like I said, on When Stand Up Stood Out, you could tell he was kind of a authoritative, take charge kind of guy.
Yeah. He was a piece of work, all right. But he was a brilliant guy, and he was, but he wasn't a perfect human being. He was like a regular guy, but he was very, very smart, and he was very dedicated to the art of stand-up comedy, and he was very pure in his motives, and also in how he saw the art form of stand-up comedy being used, especially at the Ding Ho. If you were a derivative of other people, he would not put you on. And he had a talk with me. He said, Jimmy, you got to go through your act with a fine-tooth comb and make sure you're not inadvertently, unintentionally being derivative of other people's setups or premises or punchlines. And so that was very helpful, even though nobody likes to hear that when you're first starting, but it was very, very, very helpful. And one of the biggest challenges I had, because I worked there as the daytime bartender and often the nighttime bartender, I watched, 10 acts a day for a couple of years.
You learn a lot from watching, right?
Yeah, and if you haven't been trained in it formally, which I was not, that you're thinking, wow, that's how you do it. It's like watching basketball where a baseball player swing. Oh, that's how you do it for your swing. Oh, that's how that's how you take a jump shot. So you're looking at people and you're being influenced by them unintentionally, but eventually you keep doing it and you develop your own style, your own baseball swing, your own jump shot.
Well, you mentioned that. Now, I mean, you consider yourself a political humorist, right? Which early on, I thought I'd try some political humor, and I found out you can alienate half the crowd really easy, because half the crowd's probably Republicans and half are Democrats. So whatever side you choose, you're automatically alienating half the crowd. How do you work around that to keep a crowd engaged in your humor and do what you do?
Yeah, that's a great point, Dennis. When did you start doing comedy, and when did you start experimenting with political humor.
12 years ago, and about a year in, I tried political humor, and I quit that real quick because I figured out I was offending people real quick. I said, I'm dropping the political stuff. It's too sensitive of a subject.
Yeah. So 12 years ago. So what is this? 2021. So 12 years ago was around 2010.
I was doing some George Bush jokes, and I had a guy flip me off. He said, well, yeah, and walked out. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm walking the room. I can't do this anymore.
No, it's the reason I asked about when you did it is over the last 30 years, the country has become much more divided than it has been. And people's passions around politics are much more on the surface and much more animated than they ever were, from what I can remember. So the way I basically have done it over the years is, I live in Massachusetts. It's a heavily Democratic state. Generally speaking, most of the audience is center left, generally speaking, not always, but so it coincided. I mean, my politics coincided with, generally speaking, the audience. So when I first started, I'm working in Cambridge, and it's obviously a very liberal place, and Boston the same way, not totally, but largely. So I didn't have a problem with it until I started branching out, and then people, and what happens is you get known for a certain brand, and I've always tried to make, to me, it's kind of for me, it was common sense more so than, but it tended to fall on the Democratic side of the aisle, generally speaking. So for me, I was trying to make sense out of stuff and make people laugh. And I found out as I did it more and more, when I got out of Boston or get out of New England, that's when you really find, for me, that there's really deep divisions. When I worked at 60 Minutes too, doing commentaries in 99 and 2000, that one of the biggest challenges was to make humor understandable and accessible to the whole country, not just Cambridge, not just Massachusetts, but the entire country. And so that was a big challenge, and a hurdle to overcome, and there is a way to do it. And I have learned how to do it. And a lot of it has to do with showing your personal humanity and where you're coming from. And it doesn't always work, but it's just, some autobiographical material up front. And then you break into the political stuff. And it's really helpful not to mention names, because you could talk about something like healthcare. Okay, let's just say it's healthcare. And you start talking about healthcare, my insurance company did this or whatever. I can't get healthcare. Why can't we have better healthcare? So people can hear that because it's a subject that's nobody's attached to healthcare. Right. But when you start saying, I love Obamacare or I hate Obamacare, once you attach a name, to it, then you have automatically divided the audience, like you just said. Or if you say Trump care or whatever, or build the wall or what, anything that's associated strongly with an individual or a political party, that's when the steel doors come up and the people can't hear you. So it's a really interesting thing. And I'll say this, in 2016, I was doing a show called Jimmy Tingle for President, the funniest campaign around in the history. And it was my political points and my political philosophy using humor, okay? So around Massachusetts, it worked great. Then I went on tour. I did a series of corporate events, and I went to Florida. And guess what? They don't think like people from Massachusetts. Then I went to Texas. Then I went to Southern California. And every place that I went, it had mixed results until I figured out, okay, I got to try this a little bit different. And I went into, are you familiar with Kevin McCarthy? Kevin McCarthy, he is the Republican minority leader in the House of Representatives right now. He's a big wig. And I was working in, he's about the second or third most popular Republican behind Trump right now. And so anyway, I was working in his district in Bakersfield, California. And I'm thinking California, it's probably, mostly Democrat. And I at the ride from the airport back to the place that we were going to perform. This was a private show for ranchers. Okay. I asked the woman, I said, what would you say it's like 50-50, the demographics, Republicans, Democrats? She goes, oh no, this is heavily Republican, heavily Christian area. I said, okay, all right, cool. So that's good to know. So what I did when I got on stage, I started talking about growing up Catholic and my Catholic background and how my views, and this is, how my views were shaped by my own Catholicism about feed the hungry, house the homeless, heal the sick, welcome the stranger, all of these things that are basically the tenets, the values of Christianity. And so so I'm relating to them on the same page. And I talked to them about how I had to quit drinking and I had to ask God to help me quit drinking. And how so I'm just being honest with them about my own journey with recovery. And so by the time I got to Any Politics and by the time I had learned about this stuff, the people were already with me and they were already on board.
Over at that point, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and then when I'm talking about the wall and welcoming the stranger, they could laugh at it because my views were coinciding with these values that I had already explained where I was coming from, and those values coincide with their values as well. So there is a way to do it, but it takes time, and you got to learn how to do it, and and you got to be committed to those values. That's my experience with it, anyway.
So we live in a time now where, like you mentioned, in Boston you can get away with a lot up here. Or if you go down south of the Bible Belt, you can't get away with what we get up here in Boston. But we live in a day and age where you can't even hardly tell a joke anymore and somebody's getting offended by it. So have you found over the years you've had to change your act because no matter what you say, somebody's offended by it?
I you know what, Dennis? I started doing one-person shows back in the early 90s. I got out of the comedy clubs and I started working in theaters because I wanted to be able to have that latitude. And we can pick this up later, Dennis, if you want, if we run out of time on this particular call. But I started working in theaters, and I saw Jackie Mason on Broadway, and that was a game changer for me because I saw a man doing exactly what he wanted to do in front of 2,500 people, and he didn't have to. It was heavily Jewish, and he's Jewish, and he would do a lot of Jewish and Gentile, juxtapositions, and it was really hilarious. And anyway, and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to work in the theater. I want to do my own thing. I don't want to be in the clubs where people are drinking and the waitress and that wasn't my thing anymore, especially after I got sober. And especially as I was more and more going in a political direction. So I worked in theaters, and to answer your question, when you go to a theater and you're going to see a play, the people are ready to be prepared to go on a journey about the play. They're not there to judge the play, and they don't walk out if they don't like a scene, generally speaking.
Go to the comedy club, right?
Yeah, and so it's much different than a comedy club. And the pacing is different, the storytelling is different. You can talk or do autobiographical material. You can talk about racism, sexism, homophobia, alcoholism, whatever you want to talk about, and it's, you have a freedom in the theater that you don't have in literally a nightclub. And so you have much less pushback from the audience. They might not like it, they might not agree, but they understand they're watching a play or a one-person show, and it's a different mindset. Okay,
so I mean, you've had a story career, HBO, 60 Minutes, NPR, CNN, PBS, but I mean, well, what are some of your, if you're a young comic watching this, I mean, how did you started out the David Frost show on PBS, you were a correspondent, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you remember those days?
That was fun. I got that because that's when I was on 60 Minutes. I did 60 Minutes too for 2 seasons, and I was the Andy Rooney commentator for 60 Minutes too, which was like a spin-off of 60 Minutes on Sunday nights. They had 60 Minutes on Sunday nights, and they had Andy Rooney, and I was doing 60 Minutes too on Wednesday nights.
Well, how did they find you for these gigs though, being a young comic? I mean, how were they just?
Well, I wasn't that young. I had been doing it maybe 20 years at that point.
You made a name for yourself where they came calling?
I saw an article in the newspaper and I followed up on it, that they were starting a show, and they had all their correspondents. They had Mike Wallace and Ed Bradley and Morley Safer, and they had everybody, but they didn't have the Andy Rooney guy because he was on the Sunday night slot. And so I took the end and I auditioned for it and I got the job. That's
you
how
won
it
them over. All right. So you
Yeah.
went. You were the
And-
humorous
and
commentator.
yeah, and that was, and so in terms of a young comic, I would say make your own breaks. Make
Okay.
your own breaks. Start your own shows, just like you did, Dennis, with this
Yeah,
podcast.
I started at a local bar trying to make my friends laugh. All of a sudden, I'm working with Steve Sweeney, Lenny Clark. I got you on the podcast. And
Yeah.
I outwork everybody. It's not that I'm any funnier. I put in the work. I don't mind. So it's a
That's
good.
right. And that's the work ethic. And you're making your own breaks. And that's what it's about. You know, you can't sit there and just wait for the phone to ring. That's my experience. You can, but the idea that the phone's going to ring and you're going to get this dream job is scarce. It's really about
More of a fairy tale, right?
well, it's more about doing the work, making your own gigs. I mean, I would say to young comics, host an open mic night, start your own open mic night, and get stage time. That's how you develop. You got to be on stage. And if you're interested in podcasting, start your own podcast, do your own thing. We live in a free country and you can do practically anything you want to do in the country that's legal. So, go for it, man.
Back in the day, you had to sell the
paid.
furniture, right? Move to LA or New York. Nowadays, with the internet, you can be a comedian from anywhere, right?
You really can, and you can develop your own audience, and it's very gratifying. You might not make money at it initially, but you have to invest. You have to invest your time, your effort, sometimes your money, and but that's the only way to grow. That's my experience. The only way to grow as a stand-up comic, you got to be on stage. And the only way to grow as a podcaster, as you know, Dennis, you got to do the podcast. And so I'm glad you called me for this. I really appreciate it because it's a lot of fun. And I think you're very, very professional, man. And I think your podcast is going to do great.
I hope so. Thank you. All right. So there, you work for MSNBC. Tell us about those days.
Sure. I was on the first year of MSNBC came on the air. It's 1996. And they hired 20 correspondents. And they got me because a publicist that I knew in LA pitched me for it. And my friend Glenn Schwartz, he just put my name in the hat and I went down and auditioned for it and I got the job. And the other people that they chose were Ann Coulter. Do you know her?
I've heard of her, yeah.
Ann Coulter. And the other one was Laura Ingraham. She's on Fox every night.
I've heard of her, yeah.
She's on Fox every night. Laura Ingraham.
Some tough competition. You must have really brought something to the table to be choosing you, right?
I did bring a lot to the table because I know politics. I pay attention to what's going on, and I was able to bring a sense of humor with it, and also strong views that were developed through experience and developed by reading and paying attention.
All right. So one of every comic's dreams, if you made it on this show, you were a made comedian. You were on the Tonight Show. Tell us about that. How did you get that?
Sure. I got that by, there was a writer's strike in 1988, and the Tonight Show was auditioning political comics. They wanted political material because they didn't have political monologues for Johnny. So they wanted political material. And I heard about it. And there was a club in New York at the time called Stand Up New York. And Kerry Hoffman, who ran it, called me and said, Jimmy, the Tonight Show's coming in. Jim McCauley is coming in, the same guy that got Stephen Wright. He says, they're coming in Thursday night. We want to audition you and we want to see 10 minutes. And they want to see 10 minutes of political stuff. And so I went down and I auditioned and they liked it. And I got a shot to develop a set for Jim McCauley and the Tonight Show. And so I eventually got on December 15th, 1988. And it was a beautiful, beautiful dream come true. And I was never so nervous in my whole life.
Oh yeah, that's every comic's dream. Let's see. Larry King's Weekend. I mean, Larry King, he's one of the legendary interviewers. What was that like for you?
That was great. I did that when I did my first off-Broadway show in New York. The Publicist. You know what happens? You do a show, when you do a play, it means more than doing a set in a comedy club. So you do a play, it costs more, and there's more moving parts, and it's, but it's a product. And so we have the publicist, and they put it out, and we got a great review in the New York Times that Larry King read over the air. The reviewer said something like, more than comic wit, so cheerfully intelligent, he makes his audience optimistic in the face of reality. And Larry King read it on the air, and he goes, he's taken New York City by storm. Listen to what the New York Times said about Jimmy Tingle. And then he read the part of the review, and we had a great talk. It was a lot of fun.
Guy, right? Tough crowd with Colin Quinn. I know Colin Quinn was another guy from the Ding Ho days. Was he a friend of yours? Did he get you on, or how did that go?
No, Colin was a New York guy. He wasn't a Ding Ho guy. No.
Well, didn't he stop into the Ding Ho one now and then?
No, I don't think he ever was there that I recall. But he was a New York guy. He was a Catch a Rising Star guy, and I had started before him. But Colin was he has still remained a good friend of mine, because he was one of the first guys who said, Jimmy, if you quit drinking, you could really do something in your career. So he was very helpful.
Well, I know this guy's a Boston guy, Conan O'Brien. You were on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Conan. Well, Conan came out of Harvard. He came out of the National Lampoon there at Harvard, and he wrote for, is it the Lampoon? What is the Harvard comedy paper? Is it the Lampoon? It might be the Lampoon. But he was a writer. Yeah, he was a writer there, and he's from Brookline originally. And right. And I got the job. How did I get the gig at Conan? I think I auditioned for it. I forget how I got on with Conan, to tell you the truth, but it was a lot of fun. It was a great set. I probably just sent them a tape like I did for all the other ones, and just auditioned for it, and they liked it and invited me in,
Wow. All right. You were lucky. Now, I know I'm a Sam Kinison fan, and I know a lot of people want to see Sam and say, yeah, he's hilarious, but what do you do with him? Okay, you can't put him on TV or nothing. But then came along pay television, the HBOs, the Showtimes. You could really express yourself, and you got an HBO comedy special. So what was that like for you, getting that?
Well, first of all, Sam, was a very unique and special comic. Sam Kinison. He really was. And he came through Boston, and he was good friends with Lenny Clark, and Lenny and Mike Clark brought him through Boston. They booked him at Stitches. They booked him at a couple of places, and some obscure one-nighters around the state. Yeah. And he was a really interesting guy. Rest in peace.
Mike said, I had a family place. I couldn't use him here, so he had to send him some other clubs where they had a younger crowd where they'd accept his humor.
Yeah. But in terms of HBO, I don't know if he ever did an HBO special. I know he did a Rodney Dangerfield special. But I don't know if he did an HBO. I did an HBO half-hour comedy special back in the early 90s. That's something that they had. I did it with Bill Hicks. And
how did you get that gig? What did they just?
That was through my agent, Irvin Arthur, at the time. What happens is when you move to a place like New York, and somebody in the industry, for example, HBO was still fairly young at that time. It was the early 90s. They're saying, okay, and comedy was very hot and still in the ascension. They were doing these HBO specials, these 30-minute HBO specials, and they were paying really great money. And they auditioned people. They auditioned, 50 comics in New York, and they probably chose 10 out of New York, and combination of 10 in New York and or 5 in New York and 5 in LA, or 10 in both places. And then they rented the Vic Theater out in Chicago, and they would record them over a period of a week, maybe. So, Bill Hicks might be doing his special on Tuesday at 8. I would tape mine at Wednesday at 7:30 or whatever it was. Alan Havey was another comedian that did it that year. I think Rich Hall.
Were you thrilled to be able to get your message out in like a half-hour thing like that you could get what you wanted?
Oh yeah. You know what? At that time, and just from a personal standpoint, it wasn't so much about your message as it was about your laughs. They don't care about your message. They care about the laughs, So HBO isn't saying we want a political guy. They just want
per minute.
They want laughs per minute, and they want a strong set that works. And I'm still getting small checks from HBO for that.
Residuals.
Yeah.
Can't beat them. All right, so you took a dive into acting also. I know probably best known for Chris Rock's film Head of State, By the Sea, Next Stop Wonderland, Boondock Saints. So what's it like? What's the difference between being a comedian and being an actor for you? Which one's harder?
Well, you know, it depends on how much flexibility you have with the script. With Chris Rock, the way he worked is he had us, first of all, he called me out of the blue and left a nice message on my machine. The name of his show was Head of State. And in this show, he was running for president. And he knew that I had done a lot of political stuff. So he wanted me to kind of consult as a writer on the show, on his film, not to be in it. And so anyway, I got down to New York and we're in a hotel room and it's me, Louis C.K., Tina Fey, and Chris Rock, and Nick DiPaolo. Nick DiPaolo was another one of the writers. And they sit around in a room and everybody has the script and they're reading through the script and people are throwing out ideas and throwing out jokes and throwing out premises. And I said, Chris, I can't work like this, man. I said, let me go downstairs and just try to write you some stuff, some script. So I did. And the next day I gave it to him and he loved what I wrote in the script because I could think and I could kind of envision the jokes and envision the premises and envision the whole thing. And I gave it to him and he loved it. And not only did he love it, but he put me in the film. And I wasn't supposed to be in the film, but he put me in the film. They wrote a piece for me as a talk show host. Like, remember Chris Matthews?
Yeah.
And so I was like,
yeah.
Yeah, Chris Matthews, like hardball, you know? So I'm a talk show host and I'm interviewing Bernie Mac. And Bernie Mac was his vice president in the movie Head of State. And so I wrote the script for me and Bernie Mac to do this, you know, this little improv. And in the film, Bernie Mac is a bail bondsman. He's Chris Rock's brother, and he's a bail bondsman. And I said, and so I write him the script. I go, you're a bail bond. So I'm on television. I go, this man right now is he's a vice president. You're going to be the vice president of the United States. You're a bail bondsman. What does a bail bondsman know about being vice president? He goes, I'm a bail bondsman. I bail people out. Like we bail out, Mexico gets in trouble, we bail Mexico out. The Philippines get in trouble, we bail the Philippines out. I'm a bail bondsman. I bail people out. That's what I do. And so Chris loved it. Yeah, Chris really loved it.
That's great. Wow. All right. So I want to talk about this before we run out of time. I don't know how much time we got left, but you know, comedy is such a crazy scene. And, you know, if you're on America's Got Talent, Simon Cowell will say it's going to kick you down. It's going to beat you up. If you're not ready for the toughness of being in comedy, get out because it's tough business. If there was any tougher business, it's probably politics. But you chose to go from one crazy business, comedy, and you ran for lieutenant governor of Massachusetts as a Democrat. What made you choose to enter that political arena?
Well, one of the reasons I ran is because I've been paying attention to what's been going on for the last 30 years. I also went back to school in my 50s. I went to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and got a master's degree. And I have to tell you something, Dennis, the great thing about going back to school in your 50s, you get the student ID and the senior discount. So it's a very awesome experience. But I had some, you know, legitimate academic and political chops coming out of there and credibility. And then when Donald Trump got elected, you know, I really felt like if Donald Trump can use his experience as an entertainer for his message, right, I could at least try to use my experience and my communication skills as an entertainer for my message. And people say, how did Donald Trump win? I'm going to tell you how Donald Trump won. Short, simple messages, 3 words: build the wall, drain the swamp, lock her up, make America great. 3 words. You know something, Dennis Wirth? We have our own 3 words. Feed the hungry, house the homeless, heal the sick, welcome the stranger, and I would add, fix the tea.
Keep it simple. Don't confuse anybody, right? That's a good way to get a good message across, sure.
Yeah, and so that's why I ran, and also my experience with recovery from alcoholism, I just felt that very strongly that there needs to be more places for people who are struggling with alcohol or opioids or drug addiction to get help. And when I called a place in 1980, in this winter of Christmas of 1987, I was calling detoxes and rehabs, trying to get help. I had been doing comedy 7 years, and I was going downhill in a big way because of alcoholism. And I started calling places for help, detoxes, rehabs, treatment centers, and I would get the runaround. There's no beds, there's long lines, call back next week, you don't have insurance. I called the Cambridge City Hospital a week before Christmas, 1987, and I said to the man who answered the phone, I really need help. And without missing a beat, this man said, you called the right place. You never hear that.
Right, yeah, you
I
don't
went
hear
into
at all.
that hospital. I stayed 7 days through Christmas 1987. I got out. I moved to New York City. I focused on stand-up comedy and recovery. That's all I did for a year. A year later, to the week, I went on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Wow.
The other guest that night was Bob Hope.
Wow, legendary.
So
Well, you openly talk about it. I'll share my story. And the first thing everybody says is, I'm sorry. You don't have to say that. My best friend was a recovering alcoholic. He went to AA meeting after AA meeting. He couldn't beat it. He eventually took his own life. And, everybody says, oh, I'm sorry. But, rather than sorry, I'd more like to see somebody solve the problem, okay? So that nobody has to go through what I went through again. So if you ever ran for office again and you did get in, I mean, what would be your ideas? What needs to change to solve this problem?
I would say alcohol and drug treatment. I don't like the term on demand because it sounds like you're demanding something, but I would say, for lack of a better word, free alcohol and drug treatment to people who need it, free mental health care. It's obviously suicide's horrible, and there's no one thing you can ever point to, but the number of people who are suffering anonymously and in isolation from suicidal thoughts and suicidal tendencies combined with alcoholism and drug addiction, a lot of times it's much deeper than just drinking. Drinking is the last thing you do. People have fear, resentment, self-pity, all sorts of defects and just in their own thinking that causes them to drink. And I found that out when I got sober. But so I would just say an open door to recovery and mental health, and an open door to recovery and alcoholism and drug addiction.
Because if you want help, you shouldn't be worrying about, is my insurance going to cover this? You should just be worrying about getting help, right?
You should be worrying about, where's the number that I can call to get out of my circumstances and to get someplace for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, where I can get better, where I can be around other people who are doing the same thing, and I can get better. And then not going back into the same environment with no money, but where you can very easily slip back into the same bad habits and around the same people. And I mean, it's very challenging. There's no one big answer, but it's a combination of a lot of things.
Okay, well, hopefully people are out there listening that they choose to go get the help, because I mean, there is help, and
there is help.
It needs to be more readily available, as you mentioned, though, right?
Yeah, there is help. And you can, I would call, there's lots of 24-hour hotlines, and depending where you live. Are you up in Maine, Dennis?
No, I'm in Central Mass.
Okay, Central Mass. Where at?
Gardner.
Gardner, yep.
Gardner area.
I know, and I know they got a lot of problems out there. That's everywhere. The opioids, it really is. But yeah, getting help is the biggest thing, and trying to find places and just keep being persistent about it. But something, 12-step meetings are free, and they're all over the place, and people can start just going to 12-step meetings and, meet somebody in there, and people are very open and friendly. Generally speaking, people give you their telephone numbers, and if you're struggling, people will talk to you, and you can join a group and be with a bunch of people doing the same thing. And that's the biggest thing. And the other thing is, I personally found prayer very helpful. Ask God to help you stay away from a drink or a drug a day at a time. Right. And you know who told me that? Colin Quinn told me that. He said, ask God, Jimmy, to help you stay away from a drink or a drug a day at a time. And I started doing that.
Right there, yeah. If you can't do it, maybe God can, right?
Yeah. And it started to work.
Well, good for you. All right, let's see. Let's get back to the comedy here. You're won an Emmy Award-winning documentary on the art of censorship, Damned in USA, was on Channel 4 in the UK. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, that was I went over to the Edinburgh Arts Festival in Scotland. It's the biggest comedy and arts festival in the world. It's in Edinburgh, Scotland, and they have a festival that lasts about a month, I think it is. I was over there in the early 90s. And the good thing about, taking risks, Dennis, like you're doing with your podcast, or, you once you start to branch out, other things happen by accident. So I wanted to do my one-man show. I was over there. Dennis Leary was over there at the same time doing his one-man show. And we started out together. And the Channel 4 in England, which is like PBS here, Channel 4 in England was making a movie, a film about the Mapplethorpe, the arts controversy in America. There was a censorship debate in the United States at the time with Jesse Helms and using taxpayer money for art. And people were upset about it and didn't like it. And anyway, that was a big deal. And they wanted to make a movie about the American, from an American comics perspective about that particular issue. And so they hired me to be in this movie and perform and to do some material around censorship and things like that. Yeah, and in the film, it won an Emmy in 1991, I think it was.
So it's about comics who would challenge the system, right? I mean, you mentioned Lenny Bruce earlier. I mean, he was one of the guys who challenged the system originally, and he'd get arrested for his thoughts. I mean, if you put yourself back in those days, I mean, do you feel so passionate about your thoughts you'd be willing to get arrested for them like the Lenny Bruces and the George Carlins did?
I think that now is a much different time. I mean, you can say anything on television.
Yeah, you can do anything you want now.
Lenny
Right?
Bruce was arrested. I think it was actually, was saying something about the Cardinal or something of New York or something at the time. And it was, anyway, and dropping the F-bomb. I think dropping the F-bomb in public, I think at the time was a serious offense.
Right.
In the early 60s or the late 50s. Clearly that has changed. People are dropping it on television. We had the president dropping it, So, you can be passionate without the F-bomb. You can be passionate in the way that social justice people are passionate. People who are working for human rights are passionate. It's not so much the language, it's your actions and what you're doing. And Barry Cremens is a great example. He was a child abuse survivor, and he used his passion and his experience as a sex abuse survivor to challenge Congress. And in the film that Bobby Goldthwait made, he's in front of the Senate. He's in front of the Senate or the House, House of Representatives in Washington, attacking America Online because they had become a platform that was trading in child pornography, and he was calling them out on it. So it wasn't about the F-bomb; it was about your actions as a passionate citizen, really.
Right. So, I mean, you have to pay, like I said, everybody's offended by everything. You can say it, but you're going to pay the price, everybody being offended. So it's kind of a no-win situation either way, right? But I mean, you must strongly think your message, anybody deserves to say their message, but you have to deal with the aftermath, right?
You got to deal with the aftermath. And also people might not like it. I try to be respectful of people. I say in my audiences, I say, no offense to my Republican family members and friends who are here tonight, because they are. And when Trump won in 2016, I said to a couple of friends of mine who were big Trump supporters, I thought about it, like, how am I going to, talk to these guys now? And my approach was, hey, man, you guys won. Congratulations. And that was it. And sometimes people just want to hear a little respect. You know what I mean? And I didn't have to debate them or argue about the election. Like, hey, man, you guys won. Congratulations. And they liked that. One guy said, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And that's all. Sometimes people just want respect. And even if it's not my cup of tea, but it's America and it's a free country, and people are free to believe what they want to believe.
Well, John Kerry, when he ran, he lost. He said, hey, I needed more votes. I lost. I always respect that to him. He wasn't, I want to recount. It was just dirty. He said, hey, I needed more votes. I lost. So you earn respect when you're honest. Sure.
Right.
All right. So we talked about how you got started. We talked about what you've done. Let's talk about the future. What's in the future for Jimmy Tingle? What do you want to do you haven't done yet?
Well, right now I'm working on Humor for Humanity, which is a social enterprise and that I came up with after I got out of the Kennedy School at Harvard. I said, how can I've been doing one-off, fundraisers for years. I said, I just want to do something that has some meaning to it. So started Humor for Humanity. The mission statement is humor for humanity, more than entertainment, raising spirits, funds, and awareness for nonprofits, charities, and social causes. Our mission is your mission. Humor for humanity. Humor in helping, humor in healing, humor and hope. Ha, ha, ha.
There's the pitch right there. Laughter is the best medicine. Well, you're also, I see you got a tour coming up, Live with No Mask. Tell us a little bit about that tour. What are you doing there?
Yeah, that's a new show that I'm just working coming out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, I stayed in obviously for a year, and I took my show, Jimmy Tingle's 2020 Vision, Why Would a Comedian Run for Office? That was my last one-man show, made it into a film. And so that's going to be on my website soon, Jimmy Tingle's 2020 Vision, Why Would a Comedian Run for Office? And I explain why I ran for office. This new show is Jimmy Tingle No Mask. And it's basically taking the mask off, not only myself, but also what the pandemic has removed the mask from large parts of our society, things that we didn't really acknowledge or pay that much attention to. The importance of essential workers, for example. Who would have thought that truck drivers and cashiers at 7-Eleven and janitors and people, growing the lettuce out in Arizona and these, picking the food would be essential workers, but they are. And it elevated everybody's kind of importance, in the society. I thought it was really interesting. So anyway, it's about that. And it's about, obviously there's comedy in it, but it's, that's just one example. And of course, the racial issues and all the issues that we have right now.
Okay, so how long have you been doing comedy for, Jimmy? Well, how many years has it been now?
I started in 1980, and this is 2021, so I'm coming on my 41st year.
41st year. What's the biggest change you've seen in comedy since when you started to now?
I think the comics are getting better. I think the art form has grown. Obviously, more people can do it. There's more venues. The biggest change is probably the ability of a motivated person to create their own path and not be dependent on NBC, CBS, CNN. Those are all important and those are all great, but it's really like what you're doing, Dennis, starting your own podcast, creating your own breaks, making your own little business. That's
you mentioned the podcast. I guess the godfather of the podcast now would be Joe Rogan, and he recently he mentioned you on his podcast. So let me play that clip real quick. It's a short clip, then we'll get your response to it. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, let's play the clip right now. This is Joe Rogan on Jimmy Tingle.
All right. Hey, Joe?
Yes.
Thank you so much for letting us turn the tables on you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
We're here, Joe. How are you?
nervous.
Getting ready. Oh, no. Joe, what are some of the formative political experiences of your life?
Well, I mean, I remember the first time I really got interested in politics was when Ronald Reagan couldn't remember whether or not he sold arms to Iran.
Iran-Contra.
Yeah, I was like 21 years old, 21 years old. And I remember thinking like, what is happening? And as a young man trying to figure out what was going on in the world, seeing that there's this guy who's clearly lying about selling weapons to someone who hates it. There was a guy named Jimmy Tingle. He's a hilarious comedian out of Boston, and he had a great bit about this that he would do in a heavy Boston accent. He goes, "Mr. President, if you ever sell arms to people who hate us in the future, jot it down. Post-it note. Just stick it on your refrigerator." Like, do you know who Jimmy Tingle is?
No, I didn't know who he was.
A great political comedian. It was him and Barry Crimmins and Jimmy Credico. There was a few of these guys that were like really politically aware comics. Barry Crimmins in particular, who was really the head of the like, if there was a godfather of Boston comedy, it was Barry Crimmins, because he was the most intelligent, he was the most well-read, the most politically aware, and he would be involved in a lot of like political demonstrations and all these different things, and he was kind of the guy who kept the Boston comedians honest. He kept them from being hacks, and he was just a very, very politically aware guy.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Tingle was aligned with him. He was one of those guys as well, who initially started out just a regular comic and then became much more of a political comic, and then ultimately became a guy. I don't think he does really comedy shows as much as he does like one-man shows now. But Tingle's bits about it made me think about it a lot.
All right, Jimmy, your response to Joe Rogan.
Well, clearly Joe is a very brilliant man, and he was influenced by another very brilliant man, myself.
Because Joe's a Boston guy. A lot of people don't know that about him. He started out in Boston, right?
Yeah, he started out in Boston. When I heard that, I was, I was really flattered, of course. And I remember the bit. I did that bit on the Tonight Show, actually, with Johnny Carson. But yeah, and it's just interesting to see how you can influence people with a joke, with comedy. And Joe, I was very flattered, of course. I think he's got the #1 podcast.
Oh yeah, he's got millions of listeners. They said he's got more listeners than the Tonight Show has access. If everybody who had a TV was watching the Tonight Show, Joe still hit more people on that. That's just mind blowing right there.
Is that right?
Worldwide, yeah. I mean, because the Tonight Show is only people who got TVs. The internet's worldwide. He's got such a listening base. Yeah, it's crazy. But
wow, that's wild. Anyway, yeah, when I heard it, I was obviously flattered. And I sent his producer a note to just big shout out. Thank you so much for the shout out to Barry and myself, because what he said about Barry was absolutely true. So I was just, it couldn't have happened at a better time, because we're doing the Ding Ho reunion and it starts Thursday night. And that's going to really help us get people in there. So anything you can do, Dennis, to drive traffic to my website, jimmytingle.com, so people can see the Ding Ho reunion, a tribute to Barry Crimmins, and a fundraiser for his wife, Helen, would be greatly, greatly appreciated.
All right. Well, I'd encourage the listeners to go to www.jimmytingle.com. Check out the poster there is great. The talent they have on that is amazing. It's a great ticket price, 3 nights. Go there. Jimmy, I want to thank you so much for being on Funny Like a Clown podcast.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And the people that are going to be on the show are Paula Poundstone, Dennis Leary, Lenny Clark, Stephen Wright, Bobcat Goldthwait, and about 10 more folks that you've heard of and may not have heard of, but they're all great. They're all funny, and I think you'll really love it. And it's for a great cause. JimmyTingle.com.
All the legends will be there. Hope you're there too. We'll see you soon, Jimmy. Take care.
Thank you so much. Send me a copy, would you?
I absolutely will. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
It's going to drop tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Take care, bud. Bye-bye.